Welcome everyone to the Flux Dev Meeting, March 1st. We have a couple things on the agenda today. Does anyone would like to go first?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the new Terraform module with Philip and figure out what are our next steps. And then maybe talk a little bit about what's coming next for Flux with Helm drift detection and what conclusions we have so far doing with testing of that thing.
Philip, do you want to talk about the Terraform provider?
Yeah, the work, we've released one version now, or a couple of versions, smaller versions of the provider that has the new Bootstrap resource. There is a migration guide. I've seen that people have migrated and done the migration. I've seen that somebody raised an issue with the migration regarding imports. I'm going to write to them because I think they've done something weird with the repository. Basically what it does during the import is it needs to build the customization for it to properly import, and if you don't have valid manifests in your repo, it kind of fails. So I kind of think I know what their problem is. So I've seen some small things, but nothing major, which is great. And that's mostly because it relies heavily on what the Flux CLI already does. The major thing there is I have two refactors, which are one PR that basically moves the old data sources from the old Terraform provider SDK to the new Terraform framework SDK, basically. The reason for this, I didn't want to do it initially, but I ended up having to, and that's because we have to make another breaking change, which is moving the Git credential configuration from the resource to the provider. There are a couple of reasons why this turned out to be a requirement. One of them is really it simplifies the import process, but also it allows us to add more resources, basically. Stefan raised immediately after we released the first provider, which was like, great, how do we enable people to do multi-tenant solutions? And that should be an easy step. So then I realized, great, yeah, this should actually be a separate resource that you should be able to do after you bootstrap your cluster, which is it should commit and configure all your multi-tenant things for you. You shouldn't have to be know everything about it. And we already have a CLI command for this. So it's reasonable to offer that as a Terraform resource also. And then it was great, yeah, now I don't want to duplicate Git credentials to every single resource. It has to be in the Git provider. For this, it became a yak shaving thing because for this to be a reasonable configuration, it needs to be in a block attribute. But when you're mixing the old provider SDK with the new provider SDK, you can't. So it was either do a really horrible provider configuration to make it backwards compatible, or migrate all the existing or the two existing data sources to the new framework. So I've migrated the existing ones to the new framework instead. And that enables us to get forward with the breaking change, which is moving the Git credentials. And it's a breaking change in the form of a configuration breaking change. It's not a breaking change in the sense that it's going to break existing deployments. But that's kind of where we stand today. And I want to get them done. And then I have a bunch of other things that I have in my backlog on top of that.
Yeah, when do you think we can, or what is needed to mark the current provider is deprecated and rewrite all the guides on the Terraform registry to use the new provider? So I'm talking about.
I want to get it's only the getting the deprecate or the breaking change done Really, it's moving the Git credentials to the provider. I think it's fine that we in one release do the breaking change and just mark the data sources as deprecated with a note saying, here's the migration guide. Just get people to start realizing that they should start moving to the new resources instead. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, also all these guides here, I'm guessing we have to delete them.
Most people, what I see in other providers, they create like a new tab called like deprecated in the docs, and they just like move them there. I can maybe find an example
Yep.
of.
So under guides, can we have multiple sections?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool.
So let's see here. They've even removed it now. Yeah, so the Azure AD provider, for example, used to have like a deprecated guide section, which is basically for during the time people were moving from the V1 provider version to the V2 provider version, for example. And then eventually we'd have to go through the issues, because a lot of issues are like related to how do I integrate Flux Bootstrap with Git provider X, basically, which kind of we don't have those issues anymore, because it's like, yeah, we don't have to care about that. And because we're not removing any existing features, I'm fine with deprecating the data sources, and because it solves a lot of issues. Then it creates a bunch of issues, or it creates issues in the sense that we have to take like more responsibility around things. But I think it's easier to debug them when it's Go rather than Terraform and other people's providers.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Also, I'm looking at customized Flux guide, which feels so very
Oh
wrong.
yeah, no, it's horrible. So it's like
instead of all of this stuff that doesn't actually work at Bootstrap, we can have
yeah, all these like
messages.
SOPs key annotation issues and IM annotations and other types, like all those things are kind of solved. And you can write like a more generic solution or a generic guide of basically going, if you have any use cases that you need to customize Flux during installation, this is how you kind of do it. I think that one guide that I'm going to write after all is done is also, I'm looking into a feature is kind of, I think there's a use case for, I don't know if this is a part of the Flux CLI bootstrap, but using different Git credentials in the cluster and outside the cluster during bootstrapping. So that's like a typical guide of like, how do you do that, for example? How do you have the provider use one credential, but when after the bootstrapping have the in-cluster credentials be something different? Because that's like a typical thing. You want read credentials inside the cluster and write credentials when running Terraform, for example. So I think those are kind of issues that are going to come up, kind of.
That was about the only thing I looked over.
We touch on that with the Flux CLI, right? Because when you run Bootstrap Git, you can give it, I don't know, an SSH key or token, but the Bootstrap procedure generates a new SSH key, which can be read-only and stuff like that. So yeah, it makes sense to capture this from, I don't know, credentials management or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah, and because I've removed I've removed that SSH key generation stuff from the Terraform provider, because all of that exists in Terraform. Like if you want, like it's more of enabling people and showing people how to do it properly, which is kind of easier. And if there's features missing, we can always just add the features in a lot easier way now. So it's really just I have to write some quick docs to tell people how to basically, the parameters are the same, but just what parameters have moved where, or what attributes have moved where for the breaking change there in the PR. And then we should be done to do both. I've done some, because the testing isn't great for the data sources, I've validated myself that it's possible to move from one the old provider version or the current provider version to the one that I've moved the data sources to the new framework version without breaking stuff. And also moving the credentials from the resource to the provider. That also works without actually causing any kind of state drift or anything. So all those things should be fine. But I think I did that all on Friday. It's like, as long as I can get the migration docs done, I would be happy to merge this and then just start creating issues. I have another couple of things that needs to be solved. They're not critical, but it's, for example, currently empty Git repos don't work with the Bootstrap. Is something I've realized. There are some initial. I think it worked initially, but then when we made changes to Go Git stuff, I think I broke it in the provider during development. So I need to fix that. But these two breaking changes are kind of blocking other work. So I kind of want to get that done to get other stuff done.
Okay, so the plan is to merge.
There are two
migrate
PRs there
data
that are
source.
kind of. Sorry?
So migrate data source to new Terraform SDK. This one I've approved it.
Yeah. So
this
merge 374 and 382.
Yeah, I need to. So after you merge the SDK, I need to rebase this one. And then create a third pull request for the docs and
I can create.
marking.
I can create I can add to 382. I can add docs for my for how to deal with the provider or how to deal with the actual migration. I think that's reasonable. So I'll add some docs to 382. So that, and then we'll merge 374 first and then do 382. And just like after each other.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking forward to reshaping all the docs for the new provider once we have it sorted out.
Yeah. But when that's merged, I'm fine with creating another PR that just adds a deprecation notice to the data source. It doesn't break it doesn't break anything, but we need to get the information out there, get people to start feeling the pressure of moving without any pressure, basically.
Yeah, and if we deprecate the data sources, we also need to move the guides to a deprecate section or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And write a sim or leave the Bootstrap Git guide as the first one that people should see when they browse Terraform.
Yeah.
And also I'm thinking about redoing the main README that points to this guide on the registry Terraform.io.
Yeah, I want to try to push people more towards registry Terraform.io because that's kind of where where most Terraform users feels comfortable when they're looking for information. So yeah, there's.
So currently under guides, we don't have anything about the new resource.
No, so that's kind of one thing that there is in the resource docs, but I think adding a full GitHub guide would be good. I think that's one of those typical things, adding this is how you bootstrap Flux with GitHub, for example. It's like a typical one.
Yeah.
And we could probably do one for GitLab also, just to be inclusive. And then have like, great, these two guides are now working, and then promote them.
Yeah, you just need to rewrite the existing ones.
Yeah.
Most of the content is there anyway around explanation. And it will look way, way shorter, right? We don't need all these.
No, but it's like they're going to be shorter just because of the resources so much simpler.
Yeah, you don't decode YAML anymore. You
Yeah,
don't run
exactly. It's
kubectl stuff and all of
you don't
that.
need to be a PhD in YAML engineering to bootstrap.
Cool.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah,
great.
Philip. Let's get over and discuss with Hide the Helm controller changes.
Yeah, I think I did the introduction of the feature itself last meeting, but I think we can talk some more about the test we run last Tuesday, I think. We run the drift detection against a couple of charts using the Flux local dev setup that Stefan has. One chart in particular came out as being tricky, which is the Prometheus stack chart. Reason for that is that they have a lot of post-upgrade jobs which patch resources. They have some other weirdness in the chart, and we had another discovery in which the chart updated from 0.42 to 0.46 or something, which caused Helm to not properly update a deployment. The solution to this is to enable the force flag using spec upgrade force. But this means that the more complex your chart is, the more chance you have that the drift detection will in some way do something that's unexpected. For all the other charts, everything seems fine, which means that as long as there are no complex jobs or other post-upgrade steps and it just upgrades as it should, the drift detection will not cause spurious upgrades or do other things that are not really expected. Yeah.
How do we handle drift errors? So, for example, if you have an immutable secret, I don't know if it makes sense to put that in a chart, but let's say someone has an immutable secret in a chart, you somehow modified when you do a server-side dry run, the server-side dry run fails because, well, you can't modify immutable things. And this is also what I think it will be a common issue when dry run will fail is when, for example, like the Cube Prometheus stack chat does, they change the selected labels, and that means the dry run for a deployment fails, and so on.
So an upgrade or a drift, the drift detector will only run if the further storage object is fine and we don't see a new chart. So that's the first thing to take into account. It will only run if there's nothing else to do, basically. If it sees that something else had changed, so if you make a fix to the chart or you change something on the values, it will always do an upgrade and skip the whole drift detection thing. Taking that into account, once it does drift detection and it runs into an error, it gathers a collection of these errors. If it then still notices drift and has an error, it will log the error and continue to address the drift that it saw. If it will only see errors, it will error out and try to run it, will basically requeue and try it again. So it will do its very best to detect something. If it detects something, it will do an upgrade. If it doesn't detect anything, it will just attempt to do it again at a later point.
So if someone deletes a deployment that's in a chart, the diff will say, hey, the deployment is not there. I should do an upgrade. But if someone deletes the deployment, creates the same deployment with the name from the chart, but the spec of that deployment doesn't match the chart definition, and it doesn't match in a way that immutable fields are changed, diff will fail, will not do a drift detection because that errors out, and we'll continuously do drift. Drift will error out with immutable field changes, and we'll never basically apply it because anyway, to apply it, you need force enable in Helm because not even Helm will be able to override the deployment, right?
I'm not sure if Helm will not be able to override. Yeah, I think it won't be able to in that case because it will see that the resource already exists and it's not managing it. But yeah, I mean, it will at least error out and tell you that something is wrong. We can't do much more. I mean, it's a certain point, if you're dealing with immutable changes, then someone needs to go in and force it through anyway. I don't think that's very different for the customized controller, right?
So to clarify something that I was concerned about, and I think from what you just said, I shouldn't be concerned about. If I am watching for errors from the upgrade or from the drift detection, and I find that something changes after a chart's been installed, and I mark that thing as ignore this because I feel confident that it's something that's supposed to change, like these deployment labels in the Kubernetes stack. I am not opting out of future upgrades for that resource. If that new chart version comes along, the next version, when an upgrade happens, I'll still get the new version of that deployment. It'll
Yes.
correct the drift at that time, and then Kubernetes stack hopefully puts it back the way it's supposed to be.
Yes.
Okay.
You
So
shouldn't
the
have any-
annotation. The annotation only excluded from the actual drift detector happening, but if you somehow, I don't know, if a new charge comes along, it will just trigger an upgrade. So the further ignorance of something within a div or not is not of importance to the upgrade kicking off, which is dependent on the chart version.
So there's no condition where this is much worse than what we're doing already, is what I'm trying to establish. This is definitely better in all cases.
Unless you have a chart which does weird things after it does an upgrade, which we can't know based on just looking at a comparison of the manifest, it should be much better, yes.
So as long as you're
Basically,
monitoring
any-
for those things.
So basically any chart that has a webhook that does a kubectl edit in the cluster after Helm does the upgrade or before Helm does the upgrade, so it bypasses everything. It runs the kubectl whatever edit patch inside the cluster. All those changes will be detected by the drift, even if the desired state hooks are part of the desired state. If they do this behind the scene editing, and that editing is not done through the chart, we'll always have a diff output, and we'll never be able to correct the diff. We see there is a diff, we run the upgrade does nothing because the hook runs again, kubectl patch runs again, and you'll have like this infinite drift detection upgrade, drift detection upgrade, drift detection upgrade, and you'll waste enormous resources while doing that, right? Because the controller will keep reconciling forever that thing. So it can have major implication on production systems. If you have 10,000 charts, all of them have a webhook which do a kubectl patch, the controller will use all its resources, all the CPU it has available, and so on. It will spin continuously, doing drift detection, correction, running the Helm upgrade, which is a resource-hungry operation, right? It runs all these hooks, it creates pods. The pods have to download the kubectl container.
That is
Run
what I saw when I
right?
ran my Kubernetes stack chart through
Yeah.
without adding any annotations anywhere with post renderer. I pulled up the Prometheus graphs, and there was a huge spike in utilization until I had that resolved. So I guess what I'm trying to establish then is, can we turn this on for everybody, or what will we need to do before we can turn this on for everybody?
We can't do anything. If people write charts which run some kubectl patch behind the scene, which I find like really, really bad, if they do this kind of stuff, it's on them. It's not on us. They have to ignore it.
Yeah, the thing I've been thinking about, if it becomes apparent that it's a problem for many charts out and about there, is that we could do per object enabling. But given that touches the API spec, I want to think more about this. But that could be one option. That way you could say like, okay, this chart is so tricky and it's so difficult to also keep up to date with chart changes and then figure out how it affects the drift detection, is that you just disable it for an object in full. But for experimental introduction, I decided not to, especially because it then introduced field to the API, which we then later maybe would need to drop again.
Yeah. Yeah, let's hope the majority of Helm charts out there don't do this crazy stuff with running
Don't
charts.
like all Helm charts that use validating webhooks do this?
I think the things I've seen with CubeStack are very typical for Kubernetes stacks are very typical. Like they have jobs which do post upgrade patches on certain resource types to then switch something on again or off again. So I think that's not very common for a majority of the charts there, especially if you're not only like, I can imagine it being a thing for like the infrastructure layer maybe, in which you have a lot of difficult components that work together. But if you're dealing with like app deployments, much simpler things, I think it's less common. I hope so.
Oh yeah, I've only seen this in like infrastructure, like application deployments. Really, it's very so like I don't understand why people would do this in a kind of a business logic.
With help, because they can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. That is true. But I think I just quickly checked here because I think like a typical thing use cases, like I know Gatekeeper does this in their Helm chart, which is like currently deploying a application that configures a validating webhook, for example.
It's the
It's like
same way CubeStack runs, right?
Yeah, I think because that's like kind of the applications that you're going to see that do this is basically every single application that does. I think Ingress and Nginx controller even does this technically, because it has a validating webhook and it does post deployment jobs.
Yeah, then I think at some point people will figure out that they need to ignore certain resource kinds by default.
Yeah,
because they're just too. But then you can still get like 80% of the drift detection feature, which may be sufficient. I'm just hoping that people will try it out in their not in their production clusters, but in their staging clusters and other home environments they have, and provide feedback so we can make the right decisions around how to enable it or disable it.
So there are two ways of dealing with webhooks. One way, for example, long time ago when I helped the EKS team do their charts delivery, I used Helm TLS gen. So when the webhook gets applied by Helm, the certificates are already in there. They are generated using the Helm package, that Spring that knows how to generate certs. So in that case, there will be no drift detection because the desired state already has certs in there. For everybody that uses that project that patches webhooks inside the cluster, I don't know how it's called, gen something. All of those things will result in a drift because they modify the object after Helm does the thing. So the certs are not in the. So the more people use that project, everybody will run into issues like that with Flux. So what we can do is in the FAQ, add there a post-build example on how you can ignore validation webhooks and mutation webhooks, all of them, without no name or nothing. Because if you use the generator from that generator project, you'll always run into issues. So yeah, not all controllers will have this problem. If they use Helm properly, they'll not have it. If they use this other thing, then yes.
Yeah. It's also expecting people to do something in a specific way. I don't even think there's documentation specifically from Helm on how to do this. I don't even know. I think the last time I checked, the certificates that they generate have also an expiration date. I don't know how long it is when what Helm does there, but it's like I think this is more of a Kubernetes Helm issue of not solving this in a good way instead of just going, yeah, create a post-install job that does kubectl stuff. It just seems kind of ridiculous to me that that's kind of the way of doing it today.
Yeah.
But I digress. Yeah.
Well, we can't do much about it. I mean, nothing. We can't do anything about it. Just tell people how to ignore this stuff, and that's it. I'm not sure how set manager does it, but for example, I get no drift on the set manager chart. Have you tested it with set manager, Hindon?
Yeah, I've only seen issues with the one chart so far, Kubernetes stack. I have multiple deployments of Nginx Ingress. I have cert manager. I have traffic. I have probably
You
30
probably
charts
have
across all my
you probably
cluster.
have disabled the Nginx webhook.
I might have
Like I
disabled
did.
the Nginx webhook when they hosed everything a couple of releases ago, but I thought that they fixed that, so I could check.
Yeah, you should enable it, and Flux should continuously see drift in there as well, because they do this kubectl patch thing. Anyway, we can go forward. I think we got to some conclusions. We have some good docs that hit the road. We still need to add more things to the docs website. For example, in the Bootstrap cheat sheet, we should show people how they can enable drift detection and also enable the logs so they see exactly what's being reported as drift right here.
Yeah, I'm still working on a PR to detach the debugging logs from the trace logs, as it was
Great.
it became very.
Okay.
But I merged the PR, so I think next week we should have things up, hopefully.
Cool. Okay, so we ideally next week we'll do a new minor Flux release with this and Sontochi's Flux events command. We also need to test that. Sontochi, did you manage to get Helm charts in the events of Helm release?
It's not working yet because I need to change the way the code is structured. So, well, I think I have I have a good idea of what to do next.
Okay. Yeah, let us know on that pull request, and Kinda, maybe you can also do a test with it. You can build your own CLI, then run Flux events for Helm release for customization. And the idea here is that Flux events, the command, is very different from kubectl events, the command, because it shows you all the events of all the related objects, sources. So if you do a Flux events for a Helm release, you should also see events issued by the Helm chart, if that, I don't know, chart version wasn't found, or all the issues with that. And also for the Helm repository, maybe the URL is wrong there and so on. So it should be a single command to debug all Helm related things, which I'm
Can we-
very excited about.
Just to throw this out there, I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally typed Flux describe Helm release. Can we alias that to Flux events Helm release?
No,
No.
events is events, has nothing to
Alright.
do with describe.
All right, I'll get used to the new command since it sounds like it does exactly what I need.
Describe doesn't tell you anything about charts or related objects, so it's kind of useless. If you do kubectl describe Helm release and the chart version is wrong, you'll not see that error there. You have to do kubectl describe Helm chart to actually see the error and so on.
That is
So
true.
Flux events will sort this out by showing you a composed view of all the events which relate to that object.
And by the way, I don't see
Okay.
that I've disabled the webhook anywhere, but I know that the issue I saw in the Nginx chart around February 1st was something related to the webhook. So if you're running a version of Nginx ingress before February 1st, that might explain why you're having an issue and I'm not.
You can do kubectl
4.2.
get validation, do kubectl get validating webhook configurations, and you can see if the ingress and Nginx admission webhook is installed or not.
Yep, it is.
I,
have
for example,
rid of them.
have.
And I have
Okay.
Cappy webhook, and I haven't seen any weird reports from any of these.
Oh, another question around drift. Hida, what have we done with regarding to events? Can I get the drift on Slack, the drift alert?
It's the same as with customize controller. And then it reports created and changed objects in an event, but it doesn't report a diff because it would be too long.
Yeah, no.
I'm
not
still
the
thinking
diff
about
feature, but
no, but it does provide an event. If if it checked and nothing was skipped or created or changed, then it will only log. It will not provide you with an event because otherwise you would receive spurious information.
So people that have notifications enabled for Helm releases, let's say on Slack or Microsoft Teams or whatever, they enable the drift detection feature. They should get continuously messages in Slack, Prometheus tag change, webhook change, webhook change. So it's very obvious that what's happening, right? You don't have to tail the logs or anything like that. You'll get these notifications.
Yeah, my general advice would be to not sit behind in front of your computer being very annoyed, is to suspend all the Helm releases before you trigger on the feature gate and then just do them one by ones. As soon as you resume the reconciliation of the object, it will automatically do the reconcile, so you can trigger them. If you don't have more than like 50 of them, it should be pretty fast.
Yeah, no, I was more curious if people which don't look at logs but have notification enabled, if they can notice the continuous drift happening. And they can, because we also issue events, and if they have alerts set up for Helm releases, they will see the drift in Slack or whatever. So it's obvious. Cool. Okay. Anything else for today?
There's a couple of announcements. I know that tomorrow there's a test cube talk on the Weave Online user group, test cube and Flux. And if you are regular at the Flux Bug Scrub, we're going to repurpose the meeting for a watch party, so you can come and chat with others while we watch the test cube. There are a few other talks on the agenda, March 15th. Myself and Josef Skygelos will give a talk at the CNCF live stream, and similar talk the following week on the VS Code live stream. Slightly different audiences, so the CNCF will be more open source focused, and the VS Code hopefully will show off some Weave GitOps enterprise features. And I think there was one other thing I wanted to notice. I don't know if there's any reason to mention that Kubernetes 1.23 went out of support yesterday. So if there's anything we need to do related to that, be aware.
Yeah, we should probably drop 123 from our end-to-end test suite and add 126. Can you add there
Action item.
action item? Yeah. There are a couple of places where we test on that older version, and I can change it. Thanks. I guess that was it. Anything else? No? Okay.
Okay,
Have a good day,
everyone.
Goodbye.
See you in the next meeting. Bye.